Manever I say ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV there, osia dem yopo.
Whole system is built up. So if you've checked consistently, be it the Russia-Ukraine war or the current situation that we've had, the stock in country has hovered around the same number of weeks.
I see. It's pretty interesting because you talk about the number of weeks and then I'm looking at it and your reference to other countries. But Mr. Ofosu, the call to government in which you heard Mr. Richard Ahiagba make, which was echoed earlier in the week by the AGI and others, is that the road is quite clear on what you have to do to mitigate this impact that this is having on the consumer. The target is this one, this energy fund levy, the 1 cedi. Say, take it off. Now, what's been the assessment of this situation over the last 4 weeks by government?
Oh, I think the president made it clear in his submissions during the encounter with civil society that government is considering all options on the table and that when it deems it necessary, the right decisions will be made. Sometime next week, there will be a cabinet session. All of these matters will be tabled for discussion and the appropriate decisions will be taken. What happens is that since time immemorial, we've all known that petroleum pricing has been contingent on 3 factors. The first one is the price of the commodity, which we do not control as a country. The second one is the taxes and levies that government imposes on the product, which we control. I mean, the government controls. And then there is the exchange rate at which the product is imported, which government also should have control of, because government has responsibility to manage the exchange rate. Now, a movement in any of these 3 can affect the price at the pump. And so often when we come to analyze this, we see which of the factors is accounting for either a drop or an increase in pricing. And this has not changed. But before I even delve further, it is imperative to remind Richard that, you see, criticism of government on fuel prices did not start in the tenure of the NPP. We all were in this country in 2016, 2015, 2014. Their current flag bearer, who was vice president and head of the government economic management team, when they were campaigning in opposition, even in normal times, when there were marginal increases to reflect the existing deregulation arrangements, he took on government. So, for instance, in May 2015, the price of fuel at the pump was 3 cedis 50 pesos. Yet, Dr. Bawumia found reason to call the government of the day insensitive for pricing fuel at 3 cedis 50 pesos. So when you come to power and at a point, the price of fuel goes to 23 cedis, certainly you will come in for flag. So it is a natural consequence of the sharp increase which created huge difficulty for the people of Ghana. And therefore, there was no way that the MPP was going to escape scrutiny for taking things that far. Now, it's also important to assess what has happened. When we came to power, fuel was so likely to have the export prices of Goel. Goel. We can use Goel because it's state-owned. If you use a private entity, you may accuse them of profiteering or rent-seeking. But let us use Goel, whose objectives go beyond profit-making because they are a state entity. Now, fuel price sold, that is for petrol, it was 13 cedis, roughly the same, around the same figure that the product was selling for a week or 2 ago. And then for diesel, it was 16 cedis. That is what we came to meet. And those were normal times. Those were normal times. There was no crisis. So the price of crude oil was within manageable limits. Now, since we've been in power, one of the 2 things that government controls, which is the exchange rate, has been so well managed that it moved from around 17 cedis, and that is the price at which the importers were importing the product. It was between 16 to 17 cedis to $1.
In fact, they at that time they had their own rates.
Yeah,
They had their own rates that they go.
They was around 16. They don't use the indicative rate by the Bank of Ghana. They use what is on the market. Yes. Maybe he can clarify. But it was within that range. Yeah.
Clarify that for us. What rates do you use? Because I know there's some buffer that.
So in the previous regime, we used to have what we call the auction. The auction rate was normally the Bank of Ghana rate that which gave us 20% of what you require to import, and then the remaining 80% you source from the commercial bank.
Exactly. So it meant that their rate was higher than what the Bank of Ghana was, because if they get the rest from the commercial bank, the commercial banks will put a marker on the Bank of Ghana rate. So I think that is clear. Now we brought it down to a level where it affected the prices at the pump. So, Alfred, for about 10, 11, 12 months, the price of fuel at the pump consistently reduced and gave significant relief to the people of Ghana. Indeed, you mentioned that at some point, the oil marketing companies were engaged in price wars because they were selling fuel under 9 cedis. That was a direct consequence of proper management of one of the factors that affect fuel prices. Sometimes, I think on 3 or 4 occasions, there were marginal increases when there were some shifts on the world market in terms of the pricing of crude oil. So everybody attests that we put in better management of the petroleum sector than we came to inherit. So the price at which it was selling for right before this conflict began was much lower than what we inherited. That was not the case under the NPP. Indeed, by the time the Russian-Ukraine crisis struck, fuel prices were hovering around 6 cedis a litre at the pump. Meanwhile, they came to meet it under 4 cedis. And that was because some of the factors, like exchange rate, had begun to deteriorate. Indeed, today, fuel price is being sold close to what we came to meet, despite the existence of this conflict, which you yourself attest has upset the market. In fact, when the Russian-Ukraine conflict broke out in February of 2022, crude oil prices were selling just under $100 at the time. The exchange rate was around 6 cedis. It had moved from around 4 cedis to 6 cedis by the time the Russian-Ukraine conflict arose. But Alfred, this peaked in August at $137 a barrel. That was the highest it went to. So fuel prices went to around 12, 13 cedis a litre. This is August 2022. Now, after that high point, the price of crude oil on the market began to drop. It dropped so much that by November 2022, crude oil prices were selling at $86.5 per barrel. So you would have expected a corresponding steep decline because it had moved from 137. So if the thing was selling us at 12, 13 cedis at the pump, when the thing was $137 a barrel, you would expect that once it goes down to $86 a barrel, then the price at the pump in Ghana would also reduce significantly. But Alfred, by that time, their economic mismanagement, which had destroyed the economy, had kicked in. The currency depreciated from 6 cedis in July of 2022 to 17 cedis by November 2022. So that led to a sharp rise in the price at the pump. When the world market price of crude oil was falling, it went to 23 cedis a litre for diesel and around 17 cedis, 18 cedis for petrol. So that was when we said that they cannot blame the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Because if it was a conflict alone that was accounting for the problem, the price of crude oil will fall. But the price of crude oil fell. But the price of fuel at the pump went to their highest levels in the history of Ghana at a time when the market price had dropped. And why was that the reason? And why was that? It was because they had mismanaged the economy and the currency had virtually been destroyed. That is not the case today. Alfred, in addition to the destruction of the cedi, you have listed a number of taxes. So you need to look at the taxation behavior of the government at the time to see whether it had impact on the price of fuel. It is true that we have imposed the energy fund levy. And the reason for that has been clear. And let me clarify. that when they were in power, there was a fiat by President Akufo-Addo that they should not include the price of liquid fuel in fixing the price, and that in fixing electricity prices, and that government will absorb the cost. So in other words, government was going to subsidize it. They didn't pay. So it racked up huge debt. So it was necessary to address it. And if you listen to the finance minister carefully when he went to parliament to introduce this levy, he said that this levy would generate roughly half what we needed to import oil to fire our thermal plants. Because if he imposed all of that on electricity, it will go up too much. So part of it will be absorbed at the pump, and part of it will go onto electricity price. That's why you had the increase we had last year. In accordance with the automatic price adjustment that they agreed with the IMF, they were not including fuel in the pricing. But we had to include it. That is why electricity price went up. So when they argue that, oh, we were not affected by automatic pricing because crude oil prices were falling, that is simply not true. But back to petroleum prices. Between 2018 and 2024, they increased certain levies significantly. For instance, when they came to power, they increased ESLA by 20% in 2018. And once you increase ESLA, automatically it will reflect in an increase at the pump. Again, they increased the bust margin by 300%. They increased the primary distribution margin by 247%. Then they increased the fuel market margin by 350%. And then the Unified Petroleum Price Fund, UPPF, they increased it by 429%. So if you do this, naturally, the price at the pump is going to increase. So when you add these increases in the levies that they did to the steep depreciation of the currency from 6 cedis in July to 17 cedis in November, you are going to have an increase, the sharp increase you recorded at the pump in November 2022, even though the price of crude oil had fallen to 86% by that time. So it was not the Russia-Ukraine war that was creating the problem. The problem was the factors that government controlled that it had lost complete control of. And the reason why today you find that the price of crude oil is at, I think, $110 a barrel. You yourself have said it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's it.
Which is higher than it was in November 2022. But the prices are lower than the prices that they were selling at in November 2022. The reason is that we have controlled the currency. That is why it was absolutely imperative for the Bank of Ghana to do what they did to stabilize the currency. Otherwise, by now, I'm sure fuel will be selling at 30 cedis per liter because of what is happening in Russia and Ukraine. And everybody
in
attests,
Israel?
in Israel and between Israel, the US, and Iran. Everybody attests that the part of the pricing factors that government should control has been handled. So it is clear, beyond doubt, that it is only this conflict that is contributing to this current upset. In their time, that was not the case. And that was the basis of the criticism. Let me also indicate that as of November 2024, the price of crude oil per ton, metric ton, was $667. Before this war, it rose slightly to $695 per metric ton. Indeed, if it had remained there, we wouldn't have seen any significant increase at the pump. As I speak to you, it is 1,432 per metric ton, which is twice what we inherited. And indeed, I remember my friend here reiterating the last time he was on this program about 3-4 weeks ago, that even insurance for freight has moved from $60,000, is it per cargo, to $1.6 million. So they add that to their margins.
So that the cost of insurance.
The cost of insurance because of the conflict and the risk of transporting crude oil through the Straits of Hormuz, the insurance companies have upped their premiums.
From $60,000.
$60,000 per cargo.
That's $60,000.
To $1.6 million per cargo.
Within which period did this happen? Just a quick one. Yes.
Since the war started, other insurance companies, Lloyd's and the rest, even decided that cargoes heading to Australia and others, they won't touch it.
Yes. So you see clearly.
Those coming here, and in addition to that, the normal demurrages that we experience, that is around, let's say, 30,000 to 50,000 a day. As we are speaking, they are quoting 120,000 a day. So if you are bringing a vessel to the WAF region and you cannot guarantee that it's berthing to discharge so that they can go, you are likely to experience that. So from April ending to May, that is how...
So the cost of insurance has shot up from 60,000 to $1.7 million. $60,000 to $1.7 million. That's huge. Let me quickly acknowledge and
yes.
you're
going
to go on, but let me just
okay.
Professor Ransford Jampo is in the studio, the CEO of the Ghana Shippers Authority and a professor of political science. Prof, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
Perfect.
Thanks for having me, and greetings to my colleagues here.
Wonderful. Yes.
So, Alfred, there's no dispute what the facts are. So, unlike under them, when they could legitimately be faulted and blamed for the sharp increases in fuel prices, as I've given you in clear, incontrovertible evidence, everybody sees, based on objective facts, that these factors are absolutely beyond the control of government. Now, there has been discussion about what government can do or cannot do.
In fact, that was
yes.
been the major issue. That, look, in terms of cushioning, this has been going on for about a month now. What's the thinking?
Yes.
Because there's been
So
the
what it
direct
is
pointer to this one. That you
Yes,
should take
so
it
you
up.
see, there are two types of taxations. There's direct taxation, which goes directly into the coffers of government. So the part of ESLA that goes to the road fund, for instance, is to help fix our roads. The levy that we introduced was to help address the shortfalls in buying fuel to fire thermal plants, which is critical to keep the lights on. The any sector debt recovery levy is necessary to address some debts that have accrued over the years through our own collective behavior as a country. The special petroleum tax goes directly into government coffers. However, there are levies. Those that I have told you the MPP increased between 300 to 429% between 2018 to 2024. Those ones don't come directly to government. They go to some agencies. So those ones can be looked at. And I'm sure when the finance minister comes to cabinet next week and makes a presentation, some concrete decisions to be taken in that respect to cushion the people of Ghana against those factors that we do not control. But the facts must be reiterated that the force equivalent that is being attempted. I've even heard people say that, this shows how deceitful the NDC were in their politics. There was no deceit. If
you made a lot of politics out of this Russia-Ukraine.
But I've told you, I've actually explained it to you, and I don't mind going over it briefly. In 2015, the price of petrol was 3 cedis 50 pesos, 3 cedis 60 pesos, depending on where you bought it. The MPP flag bearer today, who was then running mate at the time, described the government as insensitive. At the time, we had just introduced ESLA in order that we are able to address the perennial problem of shortfalls in the petroleum. And everybody agrees that since we introduced that, the problems associated with piling debt, which leads to shortages, has completely been resolved. Yet, Dr. Bawumia criticized us severely when he was in opposition. When you come to power and you pick that same product from 3 cedis 50 pesos to 23 cedis, nobody will give you products. You won't get flowers, bouquets of flowers presented to you. Mere gold and frankincense will not be poured onto you. You will come under scrutiny, especially when the factors are your doing. And I've explained to you, it was the deterioration in the exchange rates between July and November that year, which was government's fault. And the imposition or increases in these levies, which I've highlighted, between 300% to 429%, that accounted for those steep increases. And that is the reason why, even at $86 per barrel in November 2022, we were buying fuel at the pump for 23 cedis. Today, it's $710 per barrel. And we are buying fuel at what? 15 cedis and 17 cedis, which is lower than it. And that is what stabilization of the currency will do. And I've heard people criticize government. Some have faulted the Bank of Ghana for purchasing gold to that extent. Some have even faulted them for rebalancing their portfolio assets so that their reserve portfolio, so that they will have liquidity to be able to support exports or imports that we need to do as a country. So those factors must clearly be defined in order that we have a handle on what is happening. But as for the fact that government will act to cushion consumers at a point, That is almost inevitable, and it is a certainty.
Because
Thank you very much.
the president talked about one of the weapons being removing this one. So if you say there's going to be a
No,
cabinet,
he didn't say that one. I've told you that there are two types of taxes that we put on fuel. There's direct taxation. The energy fund is a direct tax.
Yes.
That goes to government. Special petroleum tax. What do you call it? And the others. But then there are levies. Those levies don't necessarily come to government. They don't come to government chest. They go to manage the sector. And often it stays with the
that's
SPE.
going to be the target,
now those
the
ones
area.
who are, if you add it, you have between 1.5 cedis and 2 cedis. Those levies alone account for between 1.5 to 2 cedis in terms of the price build-up. So there is leeway there for government to look at those levies and do something about it in order that we are able to see some cushioning at the pumps. But of course, the most permanent solution to this will be for the conflict to end quickly, so that then there's no need for any further adjustment. But as for what government has to do in order to keep prices stable, the evidence is that since we came to power, we have been doing it. And that is why Ghanaians enjoyed the longest sustained period of reductions in fuel price at the pump under this government until the emergence of this conflict.
Well, good morning again, Alfred, and good morning to Felix and to your viewers. I think that fuel prices, we knew was going to go up the minute the war started. I think that conversation came up in your various studios here, where the MPA boss was here, Eduji. And so this is not a surprise that was sprung on us, as though that we didn't know this was going to happen. Yes, I think that your initial discussions as to the price build-up and all that, they are clear. Where we can make adjustments to cushion the people, it's clear. And so I'm not sure what the ambivalence would be for government as far as not knowing or waiting it out or considering what to take out. It should be manifestly clear. The price stabilization and recovery levy essentially is a built-in mechanism to stabilize prices for consumers. And so I think that is clear what can be done, including even the extra top-up that the 1 cedi top-up that the government introduced in 2025. That ought to go. So definitely the government has
said that ought to go.
I'm saying in terms of what to consider, to cushion Ghanaians. That's a line directly that can be looked at. Later on in the program, I'd want us, maybe perhaps Felix or Ben Boachi, who is here, related to the power purchase agreement. The 1 cedi, some aspect of it is supposed to be used to pay for fuel, liquid fuel.
That's it. In fact, that's the fourth objective.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
fuel supplies.
Yes.
And then the IPPs.
Yes, it's still evidence of how bad that power purchase agreement has been, because for the life of me, Alfred, I can't understand why you have a contract for someone to produce a certain product for you, and then you then are engaged to buy them fuel to be able to do it. I mean, it's just beyond me. So maybe we'll probably talk about that. Maybe Ben Boachi is here. We can see exactly the wisdom in having a certain negotiation like that. But clearly, Alfred, the government cannot but find ways to cushion Ghanaians, because when they were in opposition, the narrative was clear that fuel price increases under the former administration was in the nature of their description insensitive, heartless. And so today, if they're in government, and then part of their argument is that whilst fuel prices on the global market is going up, there is an inherent windfall that we are experiencing as exporters of crude oil. That was the argument by the Minister for Energy and Green Transitions. So if that holds true, then this government cannot,
refuse the conversation of trying to, cushion Ghanaians. And then, Alfred, the key thing is that when I was coming, I was monitoring some of the prices as I come. It varies widely. Today, diesel is almost 2 cedis more expensive than it was when the MPP left office, which is a manifest pain that Ghanaians are going through. So if you assume that it's 2 cedis more per liter, okay, so that's about 8 cedis more if you're looking at a gallon. So it's clear that cost of living has gone up. And in fact, the gains that the government is very happy to talk about all the time about inflation, even though it doesn't make much sense in our lives today when you go to the market, even before now. But with the increases in fuel now, it's going to make absolutely no sense, because you've said it very rightly, that if fuel prices go up, it turns everything upside down, because then everything else then goes up. And then you are going to be back in the territory of inflation right now as we speak. And the president makes a point indicating the push factors. Alfred, there's no guarantee that our currency will continue to be resilient, because you are in a turbulent environment, right? Now, prices have got off the chain. Crude prices have gone up, I think, moving between 109, 110. I think last week sometime I saw it 111. So it keeps fluctuating in that space. Now, if this continues and leads to inflation in other countries, say, for example, in the US, for example, which leads them to increase interest rates, then you know clearly that it's going to have effect on our currency, because then there will be inflation and our currency will be affected. And if the currency is affected, the one thing the president thinks that is a guarantee would go off the chain. And also, clearly, Alfred, the stability of our cedi is not anchored in terms of other production apart from gold. So our export basket is limited, really. And I'm thinking, I'll just check in the numbers. I can confirm that for you once I stop talking about our trade balance, right? We are not running a trade surplus. We are running a trade deficit. And so, which means that you're
running a trade deficit?
Yeah, pretty much with the rest of the world.
I'll check that.
Yes.
Check that.
So in terms of trade, yeah, when you're running a deficit where your inflows are less than your outflows in terms of hard currency, your cedi really does not have that eternal stability that the president tries to speak about. So we're in a very uncharted territory. I think, as a New Patriotic Party, we have sympathies for the government, unlike they, when they were in opposition and were clear in their politics to be opposing for the sake of it, when they knew that the chips on the table were just so much to play with. We have sympathies for them. I think the options of removing some of those levies, particularly right now, the road fund levy can be looked at. In addition to
road fund.
Yes. I mean, because you're in difficult times, right? You're in difficult times. And these things, the levies, Alfred, I'll be honest with you, they are not supposed to be looked at as rigid revenue handles. They should be seen more as shock absorbers, so that where the need arises, they are relaxed so that the economy can breathe. Because you made a point that we run a fuel economy. So if you are very rigid with that revenue line, then it means that you are just killing your economy on the other end, because you have a direct effect.
Yes, a number of them were introduced without a sunset clause,
right?
Which is another big matter. I mean, we saw it. We spoke about it about 6-7 years ago about why a sunset clause is on some of them. The sunset clause meaning that at what point exactly does it terminate? Yeah. Does it go off? But this has become a permanent feature on our price build-up.
Yeah. I think that there was the same argument was made. I think people raised the point about, I call it a doomsday levy that the NDC brought, the 1 cedi. I think the reasoning is that what you're going to use it for does not have a sunset, or it will terminate at some point. So the revenue handle for it will not, it will be smart to want to terminate it. In fact, that 1 cedi revenue, the development levy that was put in 2012, the expectation, if I'm right, is about 5.7 billion or so. But what government needs to be able to meet the requirements or what expenditure it's raising that funds for runs in excess of 12.6 billion. Now, if you need 12.6 billion and all you are raising is 5.7 billion, it means that you have a shortfall.
This is 5.7 billion annually.
Exactly. You understand? But then
annually.
Annually, you need about 12.6 billion. Okay, so if you have a deficit to begin with, about 6.3 billion also. So clearly, all those things are needed. You can't put a sunset clause in there. So our politics should be honest. If our politics is honest, we will not be having some of these issues. Because when we're in opposition, when government were faced with this issue, the sad thing was that the NDC elected to politicize it, okay, and go as far as to say that our government was insensitive. Now today, the same situation is playing out, and we expect them to act in a manner they wanted us to act when they were in opposition, which includes ensuring that they cushion the Ghanaian people. And that, for me, is the way to go.
Thank you for your initial thoughts on this. And this deserves and, in fact, requires some responses as well, which is important, because the reference you made to the Russia-Ukraine war is direct impact on what we are seeing now. The differences and similarities plays out in many ways. But what we are seeing now is also another matter of supply. And this is why I bring in the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. Dr. Patrick Ofori is just taking his seat. He is the CEO of Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. Doc, good morning.
Good morning.
This is what we got from the National Petroleum Authority 2 days ago. This is the stock as of 2nd April. So we have almost 6 weeks of petrol, almost 8 weeks of diesel. That's about 530.8 million liters for petrol, 305.2 million liters for diesel. And if you're looking at the millions, you ask yourself why it's just 8 weeks, because we consume a lot of it as well. But then, in terms of LPG, we have just about a little over 3 weeks cover. And then the direct translation as we see. So yes, in terms of the fallback, the buffer, we have some weeks, but then that's for the availability of it. The affordability of it is one that also has to be looked at critically. That's the pricing. How's the picture looking like for the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors? Before I come to Mr. Ofosu, quickly.
Thank you. Good morning to our viewers. I think it's clear that we don't have issues with supply. If you check what is currently happening, even somewhere in Europe, in Kenya, Tanzania, and then even South Africa. As I'm speaking to you, the Kenyan Regulatory Authority and their version of BOST and their the principal secretary are all in, let's say, their national security custody, because Kenya, as we are speaking, had only 16 days. So because of that, they 16 days of cover. So when you hear others you realize that we are in a relatively good position. So they were bent on securing or guaranteeing supply. So they went in for product that was of soft quality. I think that was a bit lower than what their own regulations stipulate. South Africa has also been hit with huge queues all over. So normally when we hear people talk about these numbers being too small, the issue is, as a country, we don't have the facilities to even stock beyond 3 months.
Really?
Yes, if you are to bring
the boss doesn't have facilities to store more than 3 months?
Should in case maybe Putin call His Excellency and say that I have a vessel about 200,000 KT of petroleum products, as even a government-to-government deal to give to you, you will struggle with how to discharge that, because one, you also don't have They require infrastructure to even pick a vessel of that magnitude. And even if you are able to break them into bulk, you also struggle with the storage facility. So basically, the numbers that you see clearly give an indication that the whole system is built up. So if you've checked consistently, be it the Russia-Ukraine war or the current situation that we've had, the stock in country has hovered around the same number of weeks.
I see. It's pretty interesting because you talk about the number of weeks and then I'm looking at it and your reference to other countries. But
I'm not PENDREAM TV. Now, so far so good. Say open online portal e Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.